Solid fuels are one of the main reasons that climate change is happening and affects the environment in various ways. It's been stated in order to reduce pollution caused by them, we should focus on renewable energy such as solar panels. There's a big misconception of, as the people think that everything related with solar panels is good, and this is a lie. Solar panels they're very toxic, and they have radium, which provides different health hazards when in contact with the water. In order to reduce those health hazards, countries should start recycle solar panels, and they're not doing so. They're dumping solar panels to undeveloped countries which do not know how to recycle, and they will dump it in water, and then the cadmium will be in contact with the water, and it will cause erosion to the land, making it more fertile in the future years. Another problem with solar panels is the cost of recycling them and the waste that they produce. Japan says by the year 2040 they will have around 800 tons of solar panel waste, and they do not know what they're going to do with it anymore. There's a big economic issue because it's very costly, the procedure of recycling, and countries are not willing to do so because it's not non-law that obliges them to do so. Therefore, people will need to understand that it's not as good as it pretends, and solar energy only produces 1% of the world energy in comparison to solid fuels, which is more than 20%. Question that we will have to ask is it really worth it going through solar panels if we take into consideration all of the problems that they're causing and all of the problems they're going to cause to the future generation, because we still don't know how to recycle them. And then
So there are arguments that say forestry, it's not a climate change problem. They highlight three different factors. First, the oxygen actually produced by forestry. Secondly, the carbon emission from deforestation. And thirdly, the solutions that the other side proposes. Firstly, there has been figures quoted by the French president, for example, saying that the Amazon forest used up to 20% of the world's oxygen supply. More conservative accounts say 16, 14%. The truth, says National Geographic scientists, is not even 1%. And they cite the scientific process whereby oxygen is actually produced. Now, forestry, through cellular respiration, uses up to half of the oxygen that it produces. And secondly, microorganisms feeding on decaying leaves within forests use up the rest. So, in effect, forests are net oxygen producers, producing a bare minimum for the atmosphere in itself. Secondly, they speak about the fact that deforestation does not actually produce as much carbon dioxide as previously thought. Previous claims of deforestation since 1900, contributing 484 billion tons of carbon emissions, is said to be false, and the figure is more closer to 92 billion tons, because previous models did not take into consideration forest management and the planting of new trees as of the 1950s. And a quote from that study, which was from the Iowa State University, said that the 20% of oxygen in the atmosphere is sufficient to ensure that even if all organic matter on Earth were burned all at once, less than 1% of the world's oxygen would be consumed. Then they move on to the solution for climate change that the anthropogenic arguments state, which is the planting of trees. Now, these guys say that it's not going to help. Tree leaves, for example, absorb more sunlight than even barren surfaces and warm the regional surface temperatures. Secondly, they quote the fact that forests themselves release a variety of gases. The debate outlines isoprene, which is a small hydrocarbon that, when reacting with nitrogen, forms ozone, which is of course a greenhouse gas. And lastly, they tell us that foreign trees, if it isn't managed properly, could have detrimental ecological effects that could kill local ecosystems deplete water supplies, and make fires more prone to wildfires. Thank you. Next is Lauren.
So, nuclear plants. Since the disasters of Chernobyl and Fukushima, and also with the so-called climate change crisis, there is a pressure among the European countries to shut down the nuclear power plants. So 4 countries are currently in a phase out of the nuclear plants. Just so you have an idea, in Belgium, 50% of our consumption of energy is from nuclear plants. So imagine in 2025 we're supposed to reduce that number to 0%. So it's almost impossible. A lot of scientists, well, all scientists are saying that nuclear plants are not responsible for climate change. First, there is a study in 2013 by an independent researcher that stated that nuclear power prevented 1.84 million deaths since 1971. Another report commissioned by the Climate Action Network said that nuclear plants have prevented the production of 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide. Just so you have an idea, it's the equivalent of the consumption of 125 million Europeans for a year. So that's a lot. So I asked the question to a civil engineer who worked in the nuclear plants in Belgium. He's saying that if we shut down the nuclear plants, there are 2 solutions. The first one is to replace it with renewable energy, which is basically not a solution because it's intermittent, it's not something that is guaranteed. And the other solution is to replace with fossil energy, which pollutes much more than nuclear plants. So I know what you're thinking. What is that white smoke above the nuclear plants? Well, it's not something that's polluting. Actually, it's water vapor. So how nuclear plants works? So the fission of the atom hits the water tank, as you can see the small image. Then this pressurized liquid turns turbines. Then water vapor is released, the white fumes that we see. So as you can see, there is no carbon dioxide in the process, so no harm to ozone layer. I will also like to say that there is a pressure in Europe to close the nuclear plants, but in other parts of the world there is no pressure at all. For example, China is currently building 25 nuclear plants. So now it's our next turn.
Okay, so let's head back in time a little bit to over here. So in relation to today, we would consider the people who lived in those days to be living in poverty. So what changed? What changed was that the population increased, and as it increased, communication of newer ideas and innovation popped up. As communities grew, people were able to trade from each other, learn from each other, and help each other develop. Over the years, human minds came up with new sustainable ways to produce food and energy, something humans doubt would have happened if not for the increased population. Some link starvation and poverty to overpopulation. However, it is the distribution of wealth and conflicts that hold the guilt. The UN states that there are enough food for everyone in this planet without harming the environment. Furthermore, due to innovation, people use less land and faster sustainable ways to produce. Scientists believe that the population growth has slowed down in the previous couple of years. They believe that population is like a roller coaster where the growth increases at high rates for a while and then drops dramatically. According to the UN, the fertility rate has dropped in the last 40 years. Moral of the story, we humans are adaptable to change. 2020 in relation to the beginning in the beginning of time are two different things, because communities grow and minds work together. We think that overpopulation automatically results in overconsumption and an increase in urbanization. Keeping all factors the same, it is concurred that the rich countries are the ones who consume the most. By almost any measure you choose, a small proportion of the world's people take the majority of the world's resources and produce the majority of its pollution. Let's look at carbon dioxide emissions, which is the biggest current concern because of climate change. The world's richest 500 million people, that's about 7% of the global population, are responsible for half of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. Meanwhile, the poorest 50% of the populations are responsible for just 7% of the emissions. Basically, the numbers speak for themselves. The matter is more deeper than overpopulation. Facts show us the rich half, being a very small portion of the population, consume more and emit more CO2 than the rest of the world together. So basically, take all the rich and all the poor, and even though the rich are a small percentage of the poor, they pollute more and they consume more. So overpopulation is not denied. So concluding this matter, regardless of the social class and the distribution of wealth, accepting that overpopulation will affect the climate means you have to accept that the humans will adapt and innovate. Finally, there are more worse matters affecting the climate that are not focused on.